I will officially call the Brevard City Council regular meeting on Monday, October 16th to order. I welcome everybody who is here in person, as well as everybody who is watching this on our YouTube channel. We are so glad to have you here participating in local government. Before we start, I want to introduce the people sitting up here. On my far right is our city attorney, Mac McKellar. Next to him is Councilman Maurice Jones. Next is Councilwoman Geraldine Dinkins and Councilman Mac Morrow. I'm Mayor Maureen Kopoloff. On my left is City Clerk Denise Hodgson. Next to Denise is Councilman and Mayor Pro Tem Gary Daniel. Then there is Councilman Aaron Baker. And on my far left is our city manager, Wilson Hooper. Okay, with that, I'm wondering, is Pastor Andrew White here? Okay, it looks like the pastor did not make it here this evening. Well, we will invite him back on another day. He is with the Calvary Baptist Church in Brevard. He was to give the invocation, but since he is not here, I will just give the invocation myself. Heavenly Creator, we are here to thank you for the many blessings that you have bestowed on us. We thank you for the wonderful community that we live in here in Brevard. We thank you for the safety that we have, the safe homes that we have to go to, the society that we live in, where everyone is respected and valued. And we ask that tonight you bring this elected body wisdom, empathy, understanding, as they strive to make the best possible decisions for our community. Heavenly Creator, we also ask and pray that you bring peace to our very troubled world, to those areas where they do not enjoy the peace, the safety, the homes that we are so lucky to have here. May the entire world please find peace, and the turmoil that has erupted in so many places cease. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Attention, honor, pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Madam Clerk, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Madam Mayor, you have a quorum. All members are present.
All right, Council, you have the draft agenda. I do know we have one item that needs to be added, that is a proclamation for Veterans Day. So I would make a suggestion that we add that as the second proclamation. Are there any other changes to the draft agenda?
Mayor, no closed session for economic development needed tonight.
Okay, we will remove the first closed session. Any other changes? Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Madam Mayor, I make a motion we approve the agenda as amended.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
The agenda is approved. Council, you got the minutes from the September 18th, 2023 regular meeting. Are there any corrections or modifications to the minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The minutes are approved. We will now move into public comments. Thank you. Public comment. The public is invited to speak during public comment at this time on any topic unless it is a public hearing item on this agenda. and we do have 3 public hearing items tonight. When it is your turn, step to the podium in front of City Council, state your name and address clearly, limit comments to 3 minutes or less, and avoid repetition. Direct comments to the full council, not to an individual council member or to staff. Groups are encouraged to appoint a spokesperson on their behalf. And we have one person that has signed up, and that is Mr. Rodney Locks.
Good afternoon, good evening, council. My name is Rodney Locks. I live at 187 South Rice Street in Brevard. And I'm asking you to postpone your public hearings because when you get around to voting, some of you will be gone. And then I think it's worthwhile to have the new council people understand what you're about to do. So my suggestion is not to have the public hearings and let the new council hear it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Locks. Okay, that was everyone that had signed up. We will now move on to our certificates, awards, and recognition. Okay, our first proclamation tonight is on Filipino American History Month. And I'm going to ask Ms. Florence Alwala to, did I say your name right, Florence? Close enough? Okay.
Close enough.
Okay. To join me up here, please.
May I ask the rest of my,
Absolutely. If you've got more people here, please join us up here. Yes. Yep. Okay. Proclamation number 2023, TAC 19, Filipino American History Month, October 2023. Whereas October is designated Filipino American History Month to commemorate the arrival of Filipinos in America on October 18, 1587, landing in Morro Bay off the coast of California as part of the Manila Galleon trade from Manila to Acapulco that began in 1565. Quite amazing. 1587. I can't do math. That was a long time ago. 300 and, no, 400. I can't. A lot of centuries. Whereas Filipino American History Month honors the history and experiences of Filipinos in the United States. In October 2009, the U.S. Congress recognized October as Filipino American History Month. Various states, counties, and cities have established proclamations and resolutions declaring observance of Filipino American History Month, including the state of Georgia in 2021. Whereas Filipino Americans have made significant contributions in the areas of civil rights, education, politics, entertainment, the armed forces, and in many other endeavors. The Filipino American community is the second largest Asian American group in the nation. Whereas the numbers of Filipino Americans have been historically large on the West Coast, there are growing communities of Filipino Americans in North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and Georgia. There are growing numbers of Filipinos in Brevard and Hendersonville. Whereas there is a rich Filipino American history that is being discovered, we encourage people to learn more about this growing community by visiting the website of the Filipino American National Historical Society at www.fanhs-national.org. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Maureen Koploff, and Brevard City Council do hereby proclaim October 2023 as Filipino American History Month in the city of Brevard, North Carolina, and call on all citizens to join us in recognizing and commend this observance to all citizens.
pleasure and an honor for us to be a part of this community and all the communities that we live in and grow and participate in. And we have made several friends. We used to live here in Brevard, and we now live in Etowah. But the Filipino community has been growing, but we are also a very quiet community. And, but we are a lot, we do contribute a lot to the communities that we are in. And, can I take a quick story? Quick. I'm an immigrant. My mom was hired here. You know, we have a shortage of teachers. My mom was recruited by the superintendent in the Philippines. Superintendent in Ohio to come to the Philippines to look for teachers because everyone in the Philippines speaks English. They hired 7 teachers. My mom was one of 7 teachers that was hired to come here to the States. And there's the superintendent then sponsored all the family members of all the 7 teachers that they brought here. And so with that, we became naturalized citizens as children, and I grew up in Ohio.
Well, we are so glad that you are here in North Carolina now.
Thank you very much. And we do have someone else that just joined us.
Excellent. And
Thank you very much.
it is the diversity of our community that gives us such strength and such beauty in our community. And so I look forward to working with our Filipino American community and actually learning more about that community here in North Carolina. So thank you.
Thank you.
Our next proclamation is, and it's a little early, but we don't want to take any chances and not proclaiming this in November. So we're doing it this evening in case council decides not to have the first November meeting. But this is on Veterans Day. And as you're all aware, that's a very, very special day for those of us that serve in the military. It recognizes that sacrifice that the active duty members made, as well as the sacrifice that every one of their families made during that time. And it's for those that served in the past, as well as those that are on active duty. And so, proclamation number 2023, TAC 20, commemorating Veterans Day, November 11th, 2023. Whereas, the freedoms we enjoy as Americans have been purchased and maintained at a high price throughout our history. And whereas, since the establishment of the original 13 states, Americans have been willing to fight and die to preserve their individual rights as guaranteed in the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And whereas, we owe a great debt to those who have served in defense of this nation, as throughout the generations, their sacrifices have preserved our unique form of government dedicated to human rights and respect for the individual. And whereas, for many, that sacrifice had ended in permanent injury or death, yet their spirit remains in the continued preservation of our freedoms and the promise of liberty established as an example for all the oppressed persons of the world. Whereas we in honor of these dedicated men and women, we pledge our continued defense of our nation so that their sacrifice will stand before the entire world as a tribute to the spirit and determination of people dedicated to the principles of freedom and democracy. Now therefore I, Maureen Kopoloff, Mayor of the City of Brevard, North Carolina, call upon our citizens to salute all Brevard and Transylvania County veterans who have served with honor and distinction, and to observe this day with appropriate ceremonies in honor of our veterans, both living and deceased, who have served this country so willingly to preserve the principles of justice, freedom, and democracy, to fly the flag, and to show our veterans we appreciate their great sacrifice. Veterans Day is, of course, November 11th, There will be a ceremony for the community that the Veterans Museum of the Carolinas is organizing. It will be on the 11th month, the 11th day, at the 11th hour. So 11 o'clock on Saturday, November 11th, at the gazebo in front of the courthouse. And I urge everyone to come and join us and all of our fellow veterans and give them the honor that they have sacrificed so much for all of us. Thank you. Okay, moving on. All right. All right, we're moving on to the public hearings. Okay, what do we have? The first public hearing is the proposed expansion of the Downtown Development Overlay District. And I believe Erin Bland, our Assistant Planning Director, is going to present.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So just real quick, I'm going to run through what the Downtown Development Overlay District is, what it does, and why we have it, and then go over the different options for expansion that you have before you. So what is the Downtown Development Overlay District? It is an overlay district, which is a type of zoning district that lies on top of your traditional base districts and adds an additional set of requirements to the properties that have it applied to them. So the Downtown Development Overlay District specifically adds an extra set of requirements for new construction applied only to the downtown area of Brevard. And the requirement that it has is what we call a build-to line, which ensures that new construction is built close to sidewalks and the street right-of-way, also called a maximum setback. It's sort of the opposite of your traditional setback that says you must build so far away. Build-to line says you must build so close. So with a build-to line of 12 feet, you have this zone between 0 feet and 12 feet that the front of the building must lie within. And in this example, it's at 10 feet back, it meets that 12-foot build-to line and is built close enough to the street to meet the requirement. So there are only two specific requirements for the overlay district currently in the UDO. The first one is that build-to line of 12 feet, measured from the edge of the right-of-way, and it has a build-to percentage of 80%, which means 80% of the width of that lot must be, the building must be that close for 80% of that width. However, you can reduce that down to 50% if your new building includes some sort of public space that engages the sidewalk and acts as sort of a activity center in addition to the sidewalk area. The only other mention of the specific standard for the overlay district is for the mixed-use residential units. The requirement is that the non-residential use has to be located on the ground floor in the downtown overlay district. In other districts, the ground floor shall be primarily non-residential. And it's important to note that while right now we only have these two standards that apply to the district, if we were to update our architectural standards or do some heavy lifting with that chapter of the UDO, we might decide to add more. But right now, this is all that is on the books for the Downtown Development Overlay District. So the build-to line is the zoning tool that we use to achieve ensuring that new buildings are built close to the sidewalk. But why do we want that build-to line in the first place? And ultimately, it helps preserve the feeling of walkability of a downtown environment where that's where buildings are traditionally built to. That promotes the feeling of walkability, safe walking, and pedestrian activity. Prior to the Development Overlay District, new buildings downtown could have been built set very far back from the sidewalk, which would have been a little jarring as a pedestrian if you're walking with lots of buildings nearby, and then all of a sudden there's this large expansive space that leaves you kind of feeling out in the open. And urban design professionals call this a sense of enclosure, which is the placement of the vertical elements such as your buildings and trees. And when that's proportionate with the horizontal space between them, which is the street area, that creates a more naturally comfortable place for people to be out and about, walking and just generally enjoying themselves, feeling safe and comfortable. The large or out of proportion building setbacks that were possible before break up that continuity of the buildings being close and erodes that feeling as a social, public, safe, comfortable space. All this is just to sort of say, when we see new development downtown, we want that development to be built for people and not built for cars, because downtown is a place for people to be out and about and window shopping like these folks are in the picture. If that building was set 30 feet back, they wouldn't be able to look through the window and see what's going on inside. It would just change the overall feel of downtown. So that's why we have it in the first place. It was established in February of 2020, and this is what's on the books right now today, roughly from England Street on the west, Brevard on the north, Johnson and Rice Street on the east, and Morgan Street to the south. So an expansion of this district is proposed in the comprehensive land use plan that was recently adopted. It supports implementing build two lines beyond the current overlay district. And so to that end, staff proposed expanding the district northward along Caldwell and Broad Streets up to French Broad Street. We basically incorporated all the downtown mixed-use zoning between Probart and French Broad. We also included the two conditional districts, the city camper site and French Broad Place. And this area has several large parcels that are, relatively underutilized land, and if and when they're redeveloped, that could have a major impact on the feel of downtown, how the city kind of feels as you enter coming in through Jailhouse Hill. And we need to plan today for how we want the development of this area to look and feel in the future. I will point out that this proposed area does have two single-family houses in it. They are, that's not an allowed use in DMX, but they are pre-existing non-conforming. They're allowed to continue to be houses as long as they're occupied. This wouldn't really affect them. They don't have to retrofit their house. Additions can be where they want to be. And, things like garden sheds that they might want to add don't have to abide by the build two line. So like any zoning change, planning board heard this matter and offers their recommendation to council. They discussed this in August and recommended an area a little bit larger than staff's recommendation. They wanted to also include the Princess College Plaza Shopping Center to the north. And then they also suggested going southward along Caldwell and Broad Street to one parcel beyond Oakdale Street. And the thinking there was, if we're concerned about how downtown looks as you approach from the north, perhaps we should be just as concerned about that as we approach from the south. However, staff still recommends our original proposal. We would like to take a slightly more targeted, methodical approach to expanding this district, targeting just the areas that are most ripe for redevelopment as part of our downtown core. So like I said, planning board reviewed this in August. We are having our public hearing tonight, and then you could vote on it in a November meeting, whenever that might be. And just to remind you, your options include either the staff proposal or the planning board proposal, or really any kind of combination of the two. You can always apply this to a smaller area that we advertised for, but we did advertise for the full planning board proposal. So that is the kind of maximum extent that you could apply this zoning change to. You cannot apply it to areas beyond those two proposals, but you could kind of tailor it somewhat smaller if you wanted to. So I will leave it at the maps, and I can flip back and forth if we need to, but that's all I have.
Thank you, Aaron. And at this point, we will go into the public hearing and hear from the public on what they think on this proposal. The public in a public hearing is asked to adhere to the following guidelines. Register with the city clerk by printing your name and address and phone number, which you've already done. When it is your turn, step to the podium in front of city council, state your name and address clearly. Be concise, avoid repetition, and limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. Direct comments to the full council, not to an individual council member or to staff. This is a time to provide your comments, but not to ask questions. A public hearing is not an appropriate venue for a question and answer session. Designate a spokesperson for large groups, and each person may speak once for a specific public hearing. I'll call people up in the order that you signed. The first speaker is Linda Locks.
Hi, Council. I know when you saw Faith Street, you thought, I'll see Linda. That's true. I'm interested in that area because we lived there, or my family lived there for about 81 years. And right now, it's Era's property, and so we're in the process of trying to figure out what we are planning to do and different things like that. So for me, I just pretty much wanted to know, and I talked to Mr. Bland earlier today, and he said, gave me some more information about it. Why are you wanting to extend the city of Brevard? I know you landlocked, and there's not much possibility to make the town bigger unless you expand out. And what are your plans? And I was particularly interested that you included Faith Street on there. Faith Street only has 3 houses on that street, and city campers who are planning to build a hotel. And the one thing that stands out is it also has a terrible rainstorm runoff as well. So any information you can give me, those are the questions I have. What are your plans for that area? How do you plan to use Faith Street?
Thank you, Ms. Lux. Our next,
My name is Carol Stone. I operate a business on South Caldwell Street, right across from Moody Conley Funeral Home. It's the Gladstone House. On January 28th, this past year, at approximately 5:10 in the evening, I was actually out of town. It was on a Saturday night. On Sunday, a lot of my friends had called me to let me know if I would ask if I was okay. Apparently, a driver traveling at a high rate of speed swerved off the road and knocked my entire fence down. What stopped him was the power pole, which actually broke in half on his car. When I talked to the officers on the phone that were on the scene, I said, well, how fast they were going. Since there was no police there, they thought that because of the high rate of speed and the damage to the power pole, that he was going at least 60. There wasn't any loss of life, so that was a good thing. My fence sits just right off of the sidewalk. The bad thing about it is that I had been working on this property for years, getting the property ready and presentable to be an event center, working in the garden. The insurance company's adjusters adjusted it, so they did depreciation, and he only damaged 80 feet of my fence, so that's all they would pay to replace. They wouldn't take into consideration all the hours that I spent and all the plants that I spent, nor would they replace the other side of the fence to make it match. So I'm out about $3,000, but that's okay. My point is that at a high rate of speed, drivers drive down South Caldwell Street so fast that these accidents happen. There was no alcohol involved in this incident, but 2 of my other neighbors further down the streets have had vehicles land in their front yards and destroy their property on the other side of the sidewalk. There's also, I have a picture of 2 cars that were merging at the end of South Caldwell Street, that one was flipped over because he wanted to get there first. Guess that ruined his day, because he's not getting anywhere after that. And then about 2 years ago, somebody traveling at a high rate of speed down Morgan Street knocked down another power pole, which was a Duke power pole, so it took the power out of our neighborhood. And my point is that putting the outlay further out of the actual downtown area, it's not going to be a safe area, I don't think, because of the people that travel high rates of speeds. Adding additional police, you could add 100 police officers to the police force, and that is not going to stop people from speeding down South Caldwell Street, unless they have somebody on there 24/7, and that is not realistic. Also, we know about the accidents that have happened on Broad Street recently. There was that vehicle that was traveling with a modular home, knocked down some power lines, power poles, and that was just outside of the overlay district. And then yesterday, another power pole on Broad Street was hit. And these aren't hit by somebody that's traveling at a safe rate of speed. And they're hitting on the side, or off the side of the sidewalk. So I feel stretching the downtown district wider or longer on South Caldwell and Broad Street is a danger to pedestrians. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stone. Our next speaker is Doug Harris.
Thank you very much. I live here in town. We've lived here for 28 years within walking distance of downtown. We also own a building on West Brevard between Broad and Caldwell Street, where we had our office for over 20 years. It's in the downtown overlay district currently and immediately adjacent to the proposed expansion. Overall, I think it's a wonderful idea, fully support it, and would recommend that you adopt the more extensive proposal with some modifications that I will get into in a minute. I think the idea of having the parts of downtown that we all like, when we have friends come to town, we walk a 6 to 8 block portion of downtown. The idea of that being twice as large or more, with more stores, more restaurants, that sort of thing, I think is a fabulous idea. As I understand it, that's the intention of this proposal. So again, I fully support it. The one thing I would recommend is that the lines, where those lines are located, be looked at. As it's currently drawn, I think the focus is on where the building lines will be, and that the focus should be on the streets as the primary design element. Aaron mentioned the street as the area where all the activity is, and that's absolutely true. If you look at the recommendation for South Broad Street, the line is on the line will go down the middle of the street, which means that you'll have that close to the sidewalk 2 or 3 story extending across most of the width of the lot pattern on one side of the street. But on the other side of the street, you're going to have the large setback, more of that open space feeling. And if you think about walking downtown and having the buildings on both sides of you and a sense of enclosure, that the street is really defined by 2 walls established by those buildings. Personally, from a architect standpoint, from a urban design standpoint, I feel that's very, very important, and that the intentions and goals of this proposal will be more strongly met, successfully met, with that wall, that effect applying to both sides. So in essence, what that would require is that the line going up and down Probart Street and up and down Caldwell Street would be moved over either east and west to the center of the block. I also would like to touch on some concerns I have, and that really has to do with the process that's been sort of followed here. We did not get any notice that this was even being considered. There was a notice, written notice, that was mailed out. We were not on that list. We own property immediately across. These are your rules to establish public hearings, not mine. So I wonder how many other people that are affected that should have gotten notice did not get notice, don't know that this is being proposed, don't know there's a hearing, and aren't here this evening. And that, in terms of the public's engagement, involvement in the public process, is obviously critical. Y'all represent us,
30 seconds, Mr. Harris.
and so I think that's important. It was probably simply an oversight, and that happens, but it is a concern. So, thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michael Eubanks.
Hi, I live at 294 South Caldwell Street on the corner of Oakdale Street, and which I think is often 85 Oakdale is where I pay taxes for, but I live in 294. It's the same building, same thing on one corner, but I never understood why it's got two different names for different things. Anyway, we're several blocks down from the new proposed area that would come down South Caldwell and Broad Street from West Morgan, which is the current ending of the city DDOD section. And I'm just not clear why that's been proposed, because if you go up and down that street and look what you've got, it's pretty much a series of different businesses. It's a funeral home, there's the bank. I'm not sure if the First Citizens Bank is on Morgan Street or whatever. And as you come down, Carol Stone's place and business is on the left. And it's just one thing after the other. And so there isn't a lot of space for building new buildings that the proposal would require them to build within either 12 or 10 feet, depending on what the understanding is. So I just don't see this. Now, the only thing I can think of is that the person who purchased the property that was sold by the McNeely firm when they moved over to a newer and bigger location, in the newspaper several weeks back, there was a printed map of what his expectation is for how he's going to handle that property. And the big parking area that's been used by people coming downtown for years, when the roads were closed off, they could park there and then walk into downtown. Apparently, he, in the newspaper article, suggested and showed that that was going to be a well-finished out parking area, not a place that buildings would be built, new buildings in that spot. So there's no information available to me at this point in time that speaks to that. And if nothing is eligible to be built or is not intended to be built there, there's really no point to bring in this rule and apply it to this area of South Caldwell and Broad Street. It's, it's just not going to practically apply to it. If there's a reason for extending it, I'd like to know what that reason is in regard to that piece of property. And I think the city council might want to know the answer to that also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eubanks. Our next speaker is James Carley.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the council. Good to see you, and thank you everyone for turning out this evening. Downtown overlay districts are probably my second favorite thing about urban planning after comprehensive plans, which we did in the spring. I'm a skier, and I like to go skiing in New England and skiing in Colorado. And I love the feeling of just those really great little mountain towns where the storefronts are right on the sidewalk and you can walk right into them after a night on the slopes and relax with your friends and then get around everywhere you like to go on foot. And one of the things I'm excited about expanding our beautiful downtown is that it doesn't make the town, in fact, bigger. It just makes it more Brevard. One thing I would like to highlight is that this does not change anything affecting existing buildings. If this gets passed as however district you choose, what it means is new buildings that get constructed, whether, there's some older buildings that get torn down and then there's a new project, they would have to be subject to this new one. But it's not like existing property owners would need to change anything with any existing buildings. This is looking forward 10, 20, 30 years about what kind of feel we want to have in the areas that we anticipate increased foot traffic and increased demand for both shops and restaurants and even residential units in the mixed-use arrangements. In our planning board meeting where we discussed this, we added the College Walk, the College Plaza that's on the north end, because that is an older building that we anticipate may come up for redevelopment probably sometime in the next, probably 20 years is safe to say. And then when that happens, we were thinking if we could have that district included in a downtown feel, then when you're coming into town from the north, you would pass the Methodist, I believe it's the Methodist church on the right, have the college on your left, and then as you crested that hill, you would have a gateway effect that you have arrived in downtown Brevard. And that was the logic. Instead of seeing the parking lot with that large College Walk kind of shopping center that is kind of like, to borrow a term of a friend in the room, a ubiqua building, where it's just like every strip mall kind of thing in America looks like that. Instead, if we have an opportunity to change a strip mall into a really cute mountain downtown that creates a gateway effect for people coming over the hill, that could really add a lot to our charm, character, and brand as a mountain, not just destination, but as a place to live. Towards the southern end, we had a really lengthy conversation about this because there are some buildings there that already conform to this proposal, like the Oak and Platt centers that suffered in the fire recently, that have the parking spots that are in the front. I would leave it to the planning department to specify how that would be changed. But with those in mind, that's kind of an example of what it would look like as new buildings replace the aging buildings on the southern stretch. And this would encourage a densification that likewise creates a gateway effect for folks coming in from Rosman and Cashers and further to the south and west. We stopped right at that parcel where the former Safe's attic is because there's two reasons for that. One, if you're coming up from the south, that's the first area after the curve. There was discussion, we want to extend it even further south, but no, let's get around the curve first. So you come around the curve, there's a Cardinal Drive-In, and then you've got a downtown gateway effect as well. And also the building where that Safe's attic location is, I believe there's also a bar there as well. That's also one large parking lot that creates a kind of unsafe, expansive view. And I'll just leave you with this. To concerns about traffic, it's really cool effect that creating a channel feeling actually induces drivers to go a little bit slower. Drivers will drive faster when they have a wider view shed and they feel like they can more safely get up to speed. But if you bring the buildings closer to the streets, generally you will actually reduce the psychological feel of a driver's ability to go fast. And you can add relatively inexpensive designs and infrastructure like bollards and all kinds of
30
traffic
seconds,
calming
Mr.
measures
Carley.
that can also mitigate high speeds in densified areas. So I'm excited about this. At the very least, I would encourage you to include the College Plaza Center that's across from the college on the north end, because that would definitely incentivize a really charming gateway effect as people are coming into our town. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Henry McDonald. I think I got your name right, Henry. I think it was hard to read.
Well, not being here, I guess you wouldn't know. My name is Henry McDonald. I was born and raised in this town. I have 6 brothers and sisters and a long history here. My address is 1607 Valley Mead Road in Greensboro, North Carolina. But I do spend quite a bit of time here managing our family's businesses that front both North Broad Street and North Caldwell Street. There's a total of 3 acres there, and the property first started back in, I believe it was in '59 by my father and my uncle, and then grew from there. It's not even a question for me whether or not this is a good proposal or not, because we were not included in the process. And we're one of the largest landowners in Brevard, North Carolina, in terms of contiguous parcels. The reason I was given by the planning department that they wanted to move north with this new addition to the downtown district was that they felt like our property and others close by were going to be the first to be redeveloped. Okay? That was the only reason. After questioning at the planning department, the very nice staff there was able to provide me with a copy of the planning agenda for August 23rd, of which included this information, but did not include the proposal to go south, or, if I'm remembering correctly, it did not include the parcel across the street from the college. Representing 22 shareholders and members of owners that are owners of these properties, they're going to ask, why are they doing this? Okay? And safety of pedestrians is not a good answer. It is a good goal, but to my knowledge, there's never been anybody killed on North Broad Street walking down those sidewalks. Okay? And is it Ms. Cole? Stone, I'm sorry. We've seen that too. A couple of different occasions where traffic has knocked down power poles. I was in town one time. That was a dangerous situation. And putting the buildings closer to the property lines, of which we front the 2 major streets in Brevard, is not very safe. We have some setbacks right now, and I don't believe 12 feet is a big enough setback. There's just a lot of questions that we don't have answers to because we were not included in the process at all. And that's just not acceptable. Not the property taxes we pay, not the size of development that we hope to sometime plan out and do. It would be great to be able to be part of the process and understand what everybody wants and stakeholders want. But it's just not happening for us. And we're, at this time, I have to agree with Mr. Locks. You've got the cart way before the horse and should not do this. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. All right, that is everyone that signed up for this public hearing. So now I will officially close this public hearing, and we will move on to the next public hearing, which is the proposed standards to the UDO, Chapters 2, 3, 5, 8, 9, 10, and 19, parking standards. And our senior planner, Emily Brewer, will be presenting this.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So today before you, I am sharing the amendments to the parking regulations that we're proposing. These are for off-street parking regulations, and I'll be able to touch a little bit more on what that means in just a minute. But it's important to note how we got here. Parking is a really complex issue that affects virtually every aspect of city's function, like land use, transportation, economic development, community health and wellness, et cetera, et cetera. So it's no surprise that parking in general has been a big topic of discussion for many years. As part of the Building Brevard 2030 Comprehensive Land Use Plan, there was a lot of discussion about how we balance the need for parking with other city goals, like the creation of housing, multimodal accessibility, stormwater management, and all these other topics. The adopted plan explicitly calls for revisions to the parking requirements in order to better link land use with transportation and develop incentives for multimodal access and alternative approaches to meeting the parking demand. This action step supports many of the plan's overarching goals and objectives, a number of which you can see here on the screen. But it's important to note that the UDO is just one tool. So today, we're specifically talking about development regulations in the city's Unified Development Ordinance. That means that these regulations are meant to ensure that the provision of off-street parking is proportionate to the land use. This is really related to a development project or something like that, and the parking that's required of them in their development regulations. This is done in part by establishing parking minimums or maximums for the amount of parking that's required with those new development projects. These regulations can also be used to ensure safe and efficient parking design that allows for movement and circulation, but also to incentivize development that prioritizes multimodal transportation options and some of the other goals in the city's adopted plans. So just as important is to look at what we can't do with the UDO. The UDO is a regulatory tool that we as zoning administrators have. We cannot influence city investment. That is strictly a legislative decision. We cannot amend or change any city projects. That again is a legislative decision. And we can't dictate what kinds of land uses should be on specific parcels and what a development needs to look like beyond that of a general zoning district. So that's the context of what we're looking at in regards to today's proposed amendments. So I'll reiterate, parking is really complex and it affects every aspect of the city. And because of that, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. There is no silver bullet that all cities should use to be able to fix their parking problem. It's really about needing to take into account the specific needs of that city and that area and its community when thinking about a parking change. And so some of the considerations for an appropriate parking solution and questions that we as staff asked ourselves and what we asked of planning board in our work sessions was on the screen. You know, is there available public parking or on-street parking? What kinds of mixes of uses could they potentially share parking? How dense is the development pattern and what does that mean for parking? Are there options for alternative modes of transportation? And if so, what are those connections and how expansive is it within the network of the city? So we worked on this for quite a while. This has been pretty much all through the summer and into the fall. As you know, the Comprehensive Land Use Plan was adopted in March, so this became one of our very quick, one of our first actions that we really took as staff is working through this process. We worked with Planning Board. We presented with them and had a work session with them 3 different times. The first time we went over kind of the main challenges and the analysis of the parking situation, which I'll cover in just a minute. And then we went through kind of a preliminary review with them in June, where we looked at kind of the new structure that we were proposing and some of the key elements of some of the parking models and the real meat of this. We worked with them in June. And then we finally brought an entirely revised chapter to them in August to go through each and every line and be able to hone in on these kinds of changes. So then before you today, of course, is the public hearing and then a potential vote in November. So we went through this exercise, and it's a little small on here, but it is also in your packet, We went through an exercise with planning board to look at the SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. When looking at our strengths, we have a lot of them. Ongoing investment in multimodal infrastructure really sets us up for success in moving forward with some of these more innovative strategies. We have a good amount of public parking lots around downtown in the depot area, and there is parking availability. There are no parking minimums currently for non-residential uses in downtown mixed use and within the lumberyard area. And we do have bicycle parking requirements already in our Unified Development Ordinance. But some of the weaknesses we have are there's lacking infrastructure in some of the areas of town that make on-street parking unsafe or can lead to additional traffic and congestion. We do have multimodal paths and we're making bigger investment in those areas, but it doesn't really serve the entire community. It's really along our major corridors at the moment. And so we're trying to think about that as a weakness when we think about the multimodal options. We don't have a public transit system, so driving becomes a necessity for most, if not all, residents, and that's something to consider. The ordinance that we currently have is really oversimplified and doesn't align with the new land use matrix that was then adopted by you council in December of last year. So some of the opportunities, reducing parking is known for being a really great opportunity to create infill development opportunities. Frees up additional land for housing, businesses, and a lot of other types of land uses. Shared parking agreements can be a great way of making sure that the parking we do have is utilized at all times of the day instead of just being utilized when that one business is in operation. And multimodal transportation reduces traffic congestion, improves air quality, and supports an overall community health. But we do have some of those threats, those external negative factors. Businesses and residents are really desire that free and proximal parking, and that needs to be taken into consideration. Paid parking in key areas can increase the cost of living, making it more expensive for people who are living in town, but also for developers. The increasing construction costs make parking more expensive for developers. But it's important to note the ramifications of that. If parking is more expensive for the developers, oftentimes those expenses are passed on to the tenants, the residents, and other people that would then be living in or have a business in that area. Or the developers abandon the project altogether and that property might remain vacant. So those are things to consideration as it relates to increasing construction costs. And then parking lots do not generate very much property tax revenue. And expansive parking areas really facilitate sprawl. And that's something that Aaron briefly talked about in his downtown development overlay presentation, so I won't get too far into that. Well, working through all of that with planning board, we really came up with this list of kind of staff's priorities and rationale, and planning board really helped us refine these and move forward with them. But the reason why we wanted to have this staff-initiated text amendment is really to consolidate and refine those parking standards. First and foremost, the most important is really right-sizing our parking requirements by land use and development context. This is so important because we have a lot of different types of areas and different types of contexts, and that's an important consideration for us. We also wanted to incorporate safe and efficient parking facility design, so making sure that we have safe mobility and connections throughout the parking facility, circulation, that's what I was looking for, throughout the parking facility and out onto the street. Incentivizing and encouraging development that prioritizes multimodal transit options and other best practices in urban development. This came directly from the comprehensive land use plan, really making sure we implement that. We currently don't have a parking lot maintenance standard, so we made sure that we put that in there. That was something that we really wanted to, was a key factor for us moving forward with this early on. And then managing both the potential negative impacts of too little parking and the negative impacts of too much parking. this is that balancing act that we really need to be able to consider and what we took into account. The negative impacts with excess parking include spillover into adjacent neighborhoods and really causing congestion and a lot of issues with that. And then we have negative environmental and urban design impacts from the oversupply of parking. So I'll take a first stab at that first item right here. Varying parking standards by zoning district is kind of what we as staff and planning board concurred as a great first approach and major stride for us to take with this. Our current ordinance is great in that it has no parking minimums for non-residential uses in DMX and the King Street Lumberyard area, which is great. And exempting zoning districts is a really common practice with a lot of other municipalities that are considering and moving forward with parking reform. I have a couple listed on the screen here, but Asheville, Black Mountain, Hickory, Hendersonville, et cetera, et cetera. And typically, those exemptions are around the downtown or a transit-oriented development kind of corridor where a lot of your development is happening. So that is an important context. We were looking for more of a middle ground approach. We were looking for something that accounts for our very different development contexts. And one of the first municipality to adopt this in North Carolina, we found maybe a couple other examples in other communities, but fully not as robust as Charlotte, and certainly no others in North Carolina. They adopted a tiered parking model that varies the requirements by zoning, by use and zoning district. So implementing it, based on the varying development context. And as I mentioned, we in Brevard have a very different development context in our zoning districts. That's what zoning districts are meant for. And so here's an example up on Asheville Highway. We have General Residential 8, kind of the Deer Lake Village on one side, and on the other side we have our corridor mixed use, kind of our dense corridor transit-oriented development area, where we have Walgreens and Dollar Tree and CVS and the car wash, and we have the multi-use path going through those. Those are very different development contexts that need to be considered separately. And here's another example of visualizing our parking by zoning district. The red, and I realize it's kind of hard to see, but the red is the Ingalls, it's neighborhood mixed use, and that's where the Ingalls is on Broad Street. And then we have kind of some residential mixed use just adjacent to that to the north with the Wesleyan Church and the Lutheran Church. And then on the other side, we have General Residential 8, and then there's College Walk down on the bottom of that, just to put you in some context. But it's important to note that these are very different development contexts, even though they're right next to each other. So how do we account for that in our jurisdiction? How do we say that in some cases we do need parking because the infrastructure doesn't meet those needs? And then in other areas, we want to make sure that developers don't provide too much parking and create those negative impacts as well. So the parking model that we're proposing is kind of pulling from a little bit of what Charlotte does, but really making it our own. We have some Tier 1, 2, and 3. Tier 1 is those less walkable districts with concentrated land uses, and they really don't have any available public parking options or on-street designated spaces. So in these zoning districts, which we've identified as general residential and general industrial, they would have parking minimums, but no parking maximums. In Tier 2, this is that middle ground, where we have a mix of some lower density residential and some low density commercial uses. We have off-street parking that is needed to really make sure we have enough in our public right-of-way to really preserve that space that we do have, to facilitate some pedestrian activity, make sure that those sidewalks and things like that are really preserved. But they do have some of those alternative modes of transportation. A lot of these areas are connected with the Greenway or the proposed future Greenway, and that's something that we needed to consider. And so for these zoning districts, which we've identified as residential mixed use, neighborhood mixed use, and institutional campus, they would have both parking minimums and parking maximums. And then that third tier is really the dense and heavily commercial development. And there's really two different situations here. That first one is downtown, where there is available public parking and on-street parking, and we want to preserve that pedestrian feel of the neighborhood. And then the other one is corridor mixed use, which I showed you on that first slide, the purple on that first slide, where developers and property owners are more likely to overpark than they are to underpark. So they're like grocery stores, shopping centers, et cetera, they're more likely to say, we need a ton of parking. And so we want to make sure that there's a maximum for those kind of situations to make sure that we're able to not have an oversupply of parking. So our current parking ratios look like this. The entire thing in 10 lines. We have, a couple different residentials, but it's, a couple different use categories, but it's really oversimplified. It just has some broad strokes and general use categories. And then some of these don't even align with what we currently have in our use matrix. So we really need to make sure that there's consistency in our use matrix and in our parking standards. But there's also a lot of uses that are missing from this. Like, for example, it just says civic uses, assembly uses only. What about the non-assembly uses? So we really need to be able to account for some of those things. And then again, and most importantly, there's really no variation depending on the development context. Some other things is that we do have some delineation by zoning district already, which is really great, and so we have something to work from. Some of the standards that we have right now are not transferable. So in the event that a restaurant in a shopping center becomes an office space or becomes a retail store, right now the parking requirements are 1 per 4 seats in the restaurant. If you were to transfer over, that doesn't transfer to a retail space and the demand that's needed for a retail space. So we wanted to think holistically about what we're using as our development standards as we put these ratios into place. And then this last one is we really need to accommodate the different types of space usage. This is a weird one, but for industrial uses, it says that we have to have parking for non-office space, but does not account for an office space. So we really need to make sure that we're considering those different types of space usage even within a structure or a use in particular. So this is, I'm just going to cover a snapshot of our parking model so that you can see what you're looking at and kind of get a better feel for some of the changes that we've made. But I will say that staff went through some extensive research to make sure that we came up with this. We looked at what we currently have in our ordinance, and I just showed you on the screen, what we currently have, needs and requests from developers on what kind of levels of development, what levels of parking they've been putting in place in order to serve their land use. And then we also looked really extensively at a lot of other municipalities and what they were using both as parking minimums and maximums to account for something. So we as staff and with planning board went through this line by line to really make sure that we were doing this in a way that made sense. But first I want to highlight the fact that we now have, this is just the lodging uses. So I just took a little snapshot for us to be able to work from. But we now have a new structure that matches the use matrix that was adopted by you in December. And this is really important because if somebody is defined as an overnight accommodations use in the land use matrix, they can very clearly and easily figure out how much parking they need. And this is really probably the biggest and most important change, is making sure that we are able to have that usability and improvements and consistency in the way that we apply these regulations. This top tier is all overnight accommodations except as listed below. I want to cover here the fact that we currently have a standard of 1 per room or suite. But the way that we've applied the tier system is really trying to give flexibility within the other tiers. So for example, that tier 2 is you can go half of a parking space per room or 1.5 parking spaces per room. So the minimum from that first tier is within there. But depending on the development context, context, you could perhaps see a little bit more or a little bit less than that minimum from tier 1. And then in tier 3, we have an absolute maximum of that 1.5 per room or suite. So that's just an example of what that looks like and how we applied it. But we have also created nuance where it's necessary. So for example, we pulled out short-term rentals from the overnight accommodation locations use here. And I really want to highlight the fact that we were trying to make similar standards for similar types of uses and similar types of buildings. So for example, this short-term rentals as a primary use matches the requirements for a single-family dwelling. So really making sure that if one building, whatever that building's use might be now, if it changes to something that probably would be in that same structure or in a similar context, that the parking requirements are similar or comparable enough to make sure that we can do that. So that was kind of the exercise we went through when looking at each and every one of these lines of requirements. And then we also have this one is pretty interesting. I've highlighted here the seasonal camp. In the new section 10.3, we have additional guidance for how to determine what the parking requirement is going to be when that use itself has widely varying parking demand. So for example, the music center with its event space and all that kind of stuff has very different development context and needs very different parking requirements from that of Camp Carolina. Both of those would fall into that seasonal camp item, but have very different things within that. So a number of other uses in this use matrix, like shopping centers or different things like that, we have this flexibility written in so that zoning administrators can work with the applicant to really understand what exactly their land use is going to be and account for the variation that will exist within that land use category. So that was the meat of it. I'll just briefly cover some of the other things. The proposed text amendment has a number of exceptions to the parking minimum and maximums. A lot of these are currently in our UDO, but we're really increasing them and revising them and really making them coherent and cohesive. The goal of this is to allow developers and property owners to increase or decrease, within reason, we have some ratios, but to increase or decrease the amount of parking that's required, whether it's adjusting the minimum or the maximum, in exchange for implementing urban design and development best practices, and making other site improvements that are really important as we look at kind of infill development, and especially in those kind of circumstances. This includes investing in alternative modes of transportation by adding additional bicycles or electric vehicle parking, utilizing existing parking that's in the area with shared parking agreements or public parking credits, so that if you're adjacent to a public parking structure, you can perhaps reduce yours so we don't have an excess amount of parking. Better utilizing the land, so if you have kind of, this is French Broad Place, of course, but they have their internal parking garage. So if you have an internal parking garage that's either underground or above ground, but internal to the structure, and then if you have higher level of stormwater management, those are things that we consider as well. And then accounting for site constraints. So making sure that we preserve those really important trees or are upgrading existing parking facilities that don't meet our requirements, and we're really trying to make sure that the site conditions are considered when having our parking requirements. But of course, development regulations include more than just single passenger vehicles. We have to consider loading spaces. Loading spaces are currently required in our UDO, but they're really not feasible as written. It's kind of every single business would need one, but then there's a lot of confusion around what that looks like. And so we've really streamlined this and provided some more concrete guidance, but allowed for more shared loading spaces in areas. And we want to make sure that the placement of these loading spaces are in a way that don't impact the flow of So that's a really important distinction for that loading spaces. Bicycle racks, as I mentioned earlier, we do have bicycle requirements, but we don't have very many standards. So part of what we did is look at the guidance that came from the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals and the League of American Bicyclists Bicycle-Friendly Communities Program, and used those to inform the standards that we have in this proposed text amendment. And then lastly, electric vehicle parking spaces. They are not currently within the UDO or within the parking chapter. So we added a new requirement of 2 electric vehicle spaces for every 50 required vehicle parking spaces. So really meant to say, if you are building a lot of parking, you need to make sure that you have some of these alternative fueling options available for people in electric vehicles in that area. Really as a way of saying, if you're going to be putting in all this parking, we need to have something else to improve the situation as well. And then the last thing I'll cover in detail is this parking design and construction standards. These are now consolidated all into a new section 10.7, and it includes a lot of different changes about the efficiency of parking areas, and as I said again, to implement those best practices in urban design and development. This includes allowing alternative hard surfaces. Right now, we only allow porous pavers in an exception, not as an option that you can select. So the proposed text amendment allows you to use any type of hard surface as outlined in the ordinance. But we do retain the authority as zoning administrators to require the use of porous paving materials in certain circumstances. So specifically around environmental protection and stormwater management and some of those other items as well. And then we have dimensions for angled parking and one-way drive aisles. These are really best practices in reducing the amount of impervious surfaces, the amount of pavement that you have, and having a smaller footprint on the parking that we have. As of right now, we only have dimensions in our UDO for that 90-degree angle straight parking. And so adding these dimensions will allow for some more variation and accounting for a smaller footprint. And then lastly, requiring barriers along the perimeter of parking lots and along pedestrian connections. So really making sure that we protect and preserve the rights of way and anywhere that a pedestrian might end up walking, making sure that we have those protections in place. So this is the summary of all the changes. I know it's a lot, but it's in your staff report in its entirety. But these are the things that I covered today, and I wanted to bring before you. I hope that this provides some guidance and a little bit more information about the rationale, why we're doing this, and the process that we went through in preparing these text amendments. Today, no action is requested, but we will ask that you take an action at your next regular meeting, and then I will leave this up on the screen for the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. All right, I will officially open the public hearing. The first person is Doug Harris.
Thank you again. I will admit with a bit of embarrassment that I misread some of the proposals that were being made by staff. So some of my comments that I had prepared are not relevant. I would like to, however, address a sort of a general concern related to this proposal, but in general, I think it applies to a lot of what comes out of the planning department. And I think they do a great job of keeping up with the UDO. If I compare the ordinance that was adopted however many years ago and all the changes they've implemented, the fine-tuning, debugging, if you will, of that document to make it much more usable, much more applicable. They deserve a lot of credit towards that. I haven't used it extensively since retiring, but I know from watching in the paper and seeing what's being done that it's a much better much better document now than it was originally. So for that, they deserve a lot of credit. My concern has to do with the involvement of stakeholders in a broad sense that are used or that come in to the process. The first case that we heard about, I don't believe that the heart of Brevard was notified extensively in terms of the specifics and the details of what are being proposed. I don't know that the downtown master plan committee was involved. I don't believe any of the property owners, even though they were notified that this was coming up, they weren't part of the conversations from the inception. And I would suggest that although it muddies the process and for planning staff, it makes it a slower process and more complicated going through it, that you end up at the end with a much better product, one that reflects the concerns of the people who will be affected, and that you're more likely to be successful at the end of that process because you have implemented that impact, considered input at the front end, rather than waiting until the middle or the end of this process to consider that. At which point, the stakeholders that are being affected are sort of backed up against a deadline and are going to respond much more negatively. In my case, I found out about these changes 5 days ago. There's a chance that they're going to be implemented, approved, and be policy 2 weeks from now. That's 20 days of notice, when I would argue that it was originally talked about months ago, and that as the person who was affected by that, who has to bear the effect of those changes, that our concerns should be considered and factored into the process much earlier. So if that could be taken into consideration as you move forward with other changes, I think that would serve the city, the community much more than it is currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Our next speaker is James Carley.
Good evening again, council, and I meant to say this last time, but congratulations to Mr. Morrow and our planning staff on your recent awards at the planning conference in down east. Was that in Raleigh or Durham, Carrie? Durham. Congrats. I'm very excited. This is probably my third favorite issue about urban planning. This is a very well thought out plan that has been the result of many months of engagement with research and the planning staff and planning board and analysis of what a lot of other cities are doing. The tiered model that, let me just start with my notes. This does really actually modernize and the parking regulations, and it economizes the town's land use. It does continue to develop the city over the long term for increased transportation options so that cars don't always have to continue to be people's only option. It is a dynamic parking model that allows property owners increased flexibility to build what they need while ensuring more efficient land use in the public's interest. These shared use agreements are really cool because it'll actually open up more parking without having to build more parking. The permeable pavers stipulations will help actually increase stormwater management. And also, I just love the aesthetics of permeable pavers with the grass coming through. It's a whole, you can go down a really weird aesthetics rabbit hole on Google image search that way. This plan also does help promote the long-term electrification of our transportation infrastructure, and that will have the positive effects of mitigating increased noise pollution and also mitigating increased fumes and exhaust emissions. And there was a point that I wish I could have had you go back because I forgot to take a note on that. Anyway, long story short, this is a really well thought out plan. The tiers, instead of just having a one size fits all that people have to fit, even if it's not in the best land use, this kind of helps make it a more fine-grained, more context applicable parking model for the town. And I think it'll do really good things over the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carley. That was the last person that had signed up for this public hearing, so I will close this public hearing. At this point, we will take a 10-minute recess. Okay, we will reconvene. We have finished our break, and we will move on to our third public hearing. Our third public hearing are the proposed amendment to the City of Brevard traffic schedule. And Mr. Bland will present this.
Yes, thank you. So when I was doing research for the bicycle-friendly communities application that I submitted back in August, I noticed several inaccuracies and discrepancies in our traffic schedule sections that establish the speed limits for roads in town. So this is a staff-initiated amendment to clarify these sections. I'm going to remove duplicative and erroneous descriptions of the different sections of streets that are different speed limits. So that's the bulk of the work that you see, the slashes in the new language. It's just me moving the streets in between the different sections so they only exist in one section, and that the entirety of their streets are described. And any discrepancies, I went with what is signed on the ground today. So that's how I eliminated duplicative streets in different sections. The only substantive changes are those regarding the new Maple Grove Lane, which is the new road that is going to be dedicated, or already is dedicated to the city as a part of the Acosta View Commons apartment complex that's being constructed. We've set the speed limit at 15 miles an hour and established that the entirety of the road is a no parking area. And we also added the requirement to stop before entering Asheville Highway from that road. So that's the overview of the changes. And like the others, this is just for information and public hearing purposes, and we will request action at the next meeting.
Thank you. I will open the public hearing, and no members of the public have signed up to speak, so I will now officially close the public hearing. All right, moving on to our consent and information. The following items are on the consent agenda. 1, the tax settlement report of September 2023. 2, the franchise agreement ordinance for the gas utility system, Public Service Company of North Carolina, Incorporated, DBA Dominion Energy, North Carolina. 3, Council Downtown Master Plan Committee minutes, August 9, 2023. 4, the Council Public Works and Utilities Committee minutes, September 6, 2023. 5, Council Housing Committee minutes, September 12, 2023. 6, Council Public Works and Utilities Committee minutes, September 13, 2023. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Moving on to unfinished business. The first item is the proposed amendment to the City of Brevard Code of Ordinances, Chapter 2, Utility Extension Outside Corporate Limits. And I believe the city manager will present.
Yes, ma'am. Just a brief summary of the change that's requested. We're asking you all to revise the language of this chapter of the Code of Ordinances to permit connections to city utilities by properties that are outside the city limits under certain circumstances to support economic development and housing projects. Today's change, like I said, is merely to update the code to even permit exceptions, which it currently doesn't. The terms under which we'd permit an exception will come back at a later date, but we've already started those discussions in committee and elsewhere. But some examples of some of the terms under which we'd grant an exception are included in your packet. The ED terms are not included in the packet because we're in a negotiation with a possible exception, and so I don't want to frustrate that negotiation. But we have talked about those, and Burton has come to talk about those. And just to update you, he and I have talked to an attorney about one of the possibilities, Mayor, that you offered at the committee a few months ago. And so that will be, our comments on that will be included when we bring those terms back for discussion to you at a later time. But the first thing we need to do is update the code to even allow exceptions to be made to this requirement. And so that is what tonight's request is.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second? All right, I do.
Oh, second.
Okay, now I have a second. I'll open it for discussion. Mr. Daniel?
I just feel like that
particular instances that we're discussing, we should be considering this. It seems like for housing particularly, I think that's something that would help our community. And I think for economic development, I think that would help our community as well. And I don't think my understanding is that this is not an uncommon proposal for cities in general, so.
Mr. Baker?
Yeah, and I agree. I think the one thing that makes me slightly nervous is just that the provisions as set by council, language that's in here seems to have it carries a lot of weight, and there's not a lot of detail yet. So I think my question is really, once that detail is, once we have those sort of rules by which we can do this, are those going to be written into this actual ordinance, or is it going to be left open-ended and be more of a policy document that will sort of live alongside this?
The latter.
And would future city councils be bound by that policy document?
As with all things, they'd be able to amend that at their pleasure.
Okay. But as long as whenever we pass it, we would have to abide by that and future councils.
Sure. And it would set the expectation for, folks seeking an exception about the terms they'd have to meet to qualify for one. And it would, perhaps most importantly, guide staff as to which request we even bring to you. If it doesn't meet the terms of the policy, we're not going to bring it to you.
And in the interim, before we have those officially laid before us in a policy document, the lack of any provisions would still have to come before us before it. Is that correct?
Yes, we would not, you all would have to vote up or down for every exception.
Right.
And so, and that's written in the code change as well.
Right.
And so, I wouldn't bring you one that didn't meet the sort of draft terms that we've discussed. But I would want us to finalize those and publish those publicly soon, so that I wouldn't have to make a decision about whether or not to bring you something. I could have some written guidance.
Right.
But you all would always have to vote up and down on those.
Well, I guess that's my only slight hesitation. I'm prepared with those assurances to vote for this tonight. I am intensely interested in what those policy provisions will be. And I'll admit to being slightly, whenever we talk about those, I guess slightly selfish and egotistical that, we're not always going to be up here, any of us. And and future councils are going to have to, make those decisions. And so I think passing along, some guidelines at this moment in time when we're actually discussing these exceptions is a very smart thing to do. And so I look forward to those discussions when they happen. Is there a timeline for when we would see those?
I hope that we can make enough progress in the negotiation that's ongoing here in the next few weeks that we can know whether or not that negotiation is going to bear fruit, and then bring the rest of the terms back to you for public discussion after we've got, a handshake agreement on that one. And most of the terms that I'll bring to you will mirror what is included in that negotiation.
Okay.
Jones?
Well, I think the issue that I had has already been stated by Mr. Baker. I was really concerned about the details and how we would negotiate. And if we are setting this up for now and for other councils to look at, we need to be clear and concise on how we see things, so when other councils have to come back to this and look at it, they can understand why we went there and how to navigate depending on how the future changes. Yeah, I was for it, just still had concern.
Ms. Dinkins?
Can I be last? I'm still thinking. I would like to hear from, oh, I guess
Well, Mac has.
Mac would be, Mac, will you go before me, please?
Mr. Morrow, go ahead.
Okay. I think the discussion about future policy is absolutely critical. The terms, as the manager talks about, is everything about this. And keep in mind that we are in uncharted territory, and doesn't mean that if we do this and we do something, we can't change it even again. So with that being said, I applaud the staff's provisions for, in particularly in this grant application. It's a third time, maybe just the time to do it, and it needs this to do it. So in my mind, just based on that possibility, I applaud you, Emily, for even bringing it up, because it is a sort of a square peg in a round hole for us. And as you know, it has been for me as we've had those conversations. But I look forward to seeing that policy development, and we are in a little bit of uncharted territory here.
Ms. Dinkins?
Yeah, I'm feeling really conflicted as a lame duck to make something that feels like a relatively big decision when somebody else is going to be sitting in my seat within a matter of weeks. And I'm having a hard time approving something that I feel like we haven't unpacked it yet. It's not something that I can tell my neighbor over the fence in a minute and explain what we're doing. I am not just a little bit nervous. I think, did you use the word nervous, Aaron?
Probably.
I'm more nervous than you are. There's just too much maybes in here, and I'm going to ask again, and I may have just not understood why do we have to do this right now and not wait to have the document that will live alongside, where I can understand what I voted to give the green light for? Because I do understand the greater picture of affordable housing, but I feel like we're giving something away too. Is that a question that I can ask at this point?
Yes.
Wilson? Or Emily?
Do you want me to start
Yeah,
with the
please.
grant and housing? So the housing grant is really important. We had the public hearing at the last council meeting. But in order for us to be competitive and for us to be able to really not create displacement and not add additional housing cost burden onto these low-income households that are having failing septic systems, this is the way that they will be able to connect on and resolve that immediate public health and safety issue without, having an undue burden on them. And we're really trying to preserve the housing that's in that neighborhood in particular, as it is right next to downtown. It's close to tons of amenities and recreation and employment centers. And so it's a really important neighborhood in terms of the development and the future of the town, but also we want to retain the residents that are currently in that neighborhood. And so by allowing this the exemption specifically for health and safety as a tool for affordable housing, specifically serving this neighborhood, it opens the door for a lot of additional support for that neighborhood and makes us much more competitive in the grant application. That's something that we've heard time and time again from the low-income residents that are in that neighborhood. I'm currently in the midst of collecting public comment, and I will say, if you have a public comment, please send it to me. But I'm in the midst of collecting comments on the grant application, and I've heard from numerous people that they would not be able to participate if they had the added burden of property taxes, in addition to the fact that they have the failing septic systems. And so this is a way for us to address that neighborhood, and becomes an important piece of us being able to get this grant and be able to really make a big difference in the lives of those community members. So that's for housing related, and that item B.
Yeah, and if you'll wouldn't mind scrolling down on the screen here, Emily, to the housing provisions of the utility connection policy. Those are ready for public consumption, right? Because we're not in the middle of a negotiation with the applicant right now. And so sharing those publicly isn't going to frustrate any negotiation. But even these will require a little bit more committee input because, for example, including deed restrictions, we need some thoughts on what those deed restrictions look like, right? How do you, for example, set what affordable looks like on a deed restriction? There's a couple different methods you can use, and we'd want the committee and eventually the council's input on which one of those methods we could use. So even though we're willing to share these terms here publicly today, there's still some work to be done on exactly how you execute those. But as for the economic development terms, it's kind of weird for me to talk about this with, Dan and Jonathan right here. But, we talked about terms for our current negotiation in closed session a couple weeks ago. And as I said, that negotiation is still ongoing. But if it's successful, then we would make those currently private terms public in a policy later on, and they would apply not just to our current negotiation, but to future possibilities as well. And so you've heard, and we've had a discussion on some of those in private, and so I'll just ask you to recall those because they're going to be the foundation for our future policy that we'll discuss publicly later on.
I appreciate that. I don't have any other comments to make.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Moving on to our next item of unfinished business, the proposed amendment to the City of Brevard Code of Ordinances, Chapter 66, Parking Enforcement. And Chief Tom Jordan, our Chief of Police, will present.
Before Tom speaks, I'd like to draw your attention to one addition over the information we submitted with the public hearing 2 weeks ago. And this wasn't submitted then because this isn't subject to a public hearing, but it is related. And that is, if you take action tonight, I'll ask you to adopt a revision to our fee schedule, increasing the fee for a parking violation from $30 to $50, increasing the late fee to $25, and there was one more addition to the fee schedule that we made, excuse me? That's right, the handicap. So those three amendments to the fee schedule in coordination with this action, if you choose to move forward, please.
Okay. Chief?
Since we already went over it last time, I'm just going to briefly touch on it. I know it's in the packet. The main thing to know about the wording of the changes in the ordinance are that it brings us up into the 21st century. A lot of the language was outdated. The only provision we had if somebody didn't pay their parking fine was to arrest them. And that's not, I don't think that speaks to us as a city, that we should be arresting people for not paying one parking ticket. So I don't want us to be doing that anymore. It allows us to assess late fees, and it gives us the ability to have a little more teeth when you have people that are constantly not paying their parking tickets. There wasn't an option for us other than arresting them. They didn't pay their parking tickets. But now, after I believe it's 3 unpaid parking tickets, you are subject to either having your vehicle immobilized by an item such as a boot or a similar item, or possibly having your vehicle towed. Like I said, we'll look at these things and find the one that is most reasonable. It also allows for the prevention of a cottage industry of people that know how to get boots off of cars and having their own business and coming in and removing your boot for you for a small fee. That is probably less than what the unpaid parking ticket is. And that assigns that as a misdemeanor as well. One of the best parts of this is it also gives us an appeal process. There was an appeal process before. But I think it's important that people have those options to appeal their traffic tickets if they get them, and allow us to take a good closer look at it and not give people that opportunity. So I think moving forward, the language in this ordinance is going to grow with us as we grow as a city and account for these things that were kind of missed in the past. That's all I have.
Thank you, Chief. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Is that with the three amendments that the city manager?
That motion includes both the amendments, okay, it includes both. All right, Mr. Jones?
I just think it's about time that we've made these adjustments. I mean, when we originally talked about it, I was thinking, man, when was this created? When did they come up with these numbers? I mean, I had to be a wee boy when they did this. So yeah, it's time that we made some adjustments and brought it up to current times.
Ms. Dinkins?
I only want to draw the attention to the staff memo that mentions freeloaders. I thought that was quite a graphic description, and I kind of enjoyed it. I didn't know that that was something you could really do downtown, but I guess the way our ordinances were written, that is what you could do. If you just ignore the tickets, you'll be more or less okay. And we do need people to move in and out of those highly priced parking spaces. So I would make sure that if the press is covering this in any fashion, that the word freeloader needs to be in there somewhere.
Mr. Morrow?
Well, I think since we approved it in the budget, it's an opportunity to do what we said we were going to do back in the spring. And by gosh, if it's good for Black Mountain and Highlands, it's probably good for us too.
Mr. Daniel?
I agree with all that's been said. Thank you.
Mr. Baker?
I'm going to ask a very Geraldine question.
What?
Yeah. Do we own boots?
Not yet.
I mean, okay, but do we have?
I'd like to take a look at the ones that are most cost effective and
Easiest to take off. for
yeah,
People
yeah,
that
because
are
we
not
have to be
licensed.
able to move those things around.
Okay, and we feel comfortable we have that in the budget to buy those?
We will.
Okay, that's all.
After a week.
All right, I have a motion and a second on the table. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you all.
All right, our third item of unfinished business, the proposed amendment to the City of Brevard Code of Ordinances, Chapter 2, Duties of the Mayor. And Mr. Manager.
Yes, ma'am. This was an amendment that is offered at the request of council. It will update the city code of ordinances, but also all the corresponding establishing resolutions for our committee to clarify that all appointments must be approved by council after a recommendation by the mayor is made.
Okay, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a
Second.
Okay. Mr. Daniel.
This is, as it's written, was what I thought we were doing all along for many years. So I just think it's a clarification for me.
Mr. Baker?
Yeah, I guess I'll just repeat some things I already said in terms of, yeah, I think it represents some consistency in how we appoint council members, wherein we were voting on, who should represent us at some outside organizations like the Economic Alliance and Transylvania County Tourism, but we weren't voting as a board on, the committees that we were actually serving on internally. So, I appreciate that it still includes that, the recommendation comes from the mayor, but then that the full council votes on those appointments at the end of the process.
Mr. Jones?
Yeah, Aaron's last little bit of the comment is what I agreed on. I'm glad we still have recommendations from the mayor and then the discussion and vote by council.
Ms. Dinkins?
I will vote for this, but I still feel like it is not clear enough. I actually wrote down, is this saying the same thing in different words? When you look at the ordinance language and the red type, the cross through line says appoint such committee as approved by council. And then the new section says recommend appointment of council members to serve on committees and boards subject to approval by vote of city council.
We interpreted the current language that reads as approved by council as referring to the committees themselves, not to the appointments.
And I think just to process this out loud, I pictured that as council, we would decide who serves on what board, and then we would vote on it. But that's not the language here, is that correct? That's not how we would do this in terms of sequence or in terms of process.
I mean, I guess if there was desire amongst the council to edit the mayor's recommendations, that's what you'd be doing.
Okay,
Her or his in the future.
okay.
In our current case, her recommendations would be the foundation that the conversation would be based on.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Morrow?
No comment.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Moving on to new business. Revise the council meeting calendar to cancel the November 6, 2023 meeting. Mr. Manager.
So in my experience in local government, I always find that local elected officials have a lot going on around municipal election time. And I've been to many a council meeting the night before an election where several of the folks were missing, and a couple times there wasn't a quorum and the meeting had to be called off. And so I always thought it was a good idea to give boards the opportunity to cancel their meeting the night before if they wish, to accommodate the candidates and others that are running and others that might want to participate in the municipal election. But it's purely optional. If you'd like to hold a meeting, we've got enough agenda items to hold one. None of them are urgent or time sensitive, and so they could all be postponed to the 20th. But if you choose to hold your meeting that day, we can conduct one.
Okay, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Morrow.
Sounds like a good idea.
Ms. Dinkins.
I'm going to ask very Geraldine kinds of questions here. I'm a lame duck, but I can still quack. So we have things to do, and we have things that, when I read tonight's agenda packet that seem to be urgent enough that we have had 3 public hearings. And Rodney's not going to be happy with me, but I was elected to serve until the very last organizational meeting. And I'm curious am I the only one that's not busy that evening other than council meetings? Is this, Gary, I know you're,
Well, I'll be interested in what's going on that night, yeah.
that's my question. Will there not be a quorum? Do people have plans? Am I the only one that's not? I'll be busy on election day and perhaps in the evening of election day.
So I want to clarify, that this isn't coming with a recommendation. This is just an opportunity for the board to change the calendar if they'd like.
I would like to hold a meeting. I have a few more left, and I would like to have a meeting. I think we have work to do.
Mr. Jones?
I just want to say, in all due respect, Geraldine,
This is when we say negative things.
well, no, we're going out positive.
I
okay?
know, I know.
We're going out positive.
We're seatmates.
I just recall some comments that you made earlier about some things that you were saying, and you felt like you shouldn't be making the decision when there's another council coming. So if you got work to do,
When things are not clear to me all the way.
I understand.
That's how I said that. We have things that I'm absolutely read up on and ready to make a vote on to the last minute.
So my thought process behind it was, if Wilson felt that there was something immediate and pertinent we needed to do, this option wouldn't have come before us.
That's right.
So, that being said, I know I'm gonna be very transfixed on what's happening the night before. Night of. So,
The night of. This is the night
That's the night,
before.
it's the night.
night before, I was right the first time.
There's nothing.
You're right the first.
Okay. So I wouldn't mind missing that meeting.
Mr. Daniel?
Well, first off, I think it's, there's some of the items that were discussed in the public hearing, I could use a little extra time to think about them, and that wouldn't hurt me. As far as election night, either way, I'm not that concerned about knowing the results by the minute. So I would be fine to miss
This is
the
the
meeting
night
and have more time.
before. This is the night before
Ms.
election.
Dinkins, please.
Night
You're
before.
not recognized.
Well, I still wouldn't mind a little extra time to think about the issues that were discussed tonight.
Mr. Baker?
Well, I guess it's my understanding that the public hearings we had tonight, we'll be voting on those on, this would be the meeting we're voting on them on, November 6th.
Mm-hmm. Some of them.
Said they'll be postponed until the 20th.
Okay. Well, then, yeah, I think we should hold the meeting on November 6th. I'm particularly concerned about some of those things we talked about tonight, and, I guess without going into too much detail, I think some of those things are really important to get past relatively quickly. So I would rather hold the meeting on that evening, given that we have pending votes on some things that are going to change our ordinances relatively substantially.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the table. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, that was 2 ayes.
Did you vote aye?
No, I did not vote aye.
Okay, I'm just making
So-
sure I
so
heard.
we had
Two ayes. Opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so the motion does not pass. All right, that is it for new business, and we will move on to remarks and future agenda considerations. And we will start with Mr. Morrow.
No comment.
Okay, and we will go on to Ms. Dinkins.
I'm saving it all for my last meeting, so everybody else have nothing to report on the 20th, I think, of November.
Mr. Jones.
Yes, just a reminder that the Moms Mabley Historical Marker Dedication Ceremony will be this Friday, October 20th, starting at 5 p.m. We'll start at Clemson Plaza with some speakers and unveiling of the actual sign Then we'll move on to the Mary C. Jenkins Community Center and Cultural Center for a short film about moms with refreshments and socializing. So this has been a long time in the making, so we hope all of you will show up and be a part of this celebration for an individual who is a home person who made it big, and we want to celebrate that.
5 o'clock.
5 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Baker?
Yeah, I've got a couple things. I want to comment generally. I know we're going to actually vote and comment specifically on some of the public hearings we had tonight on November 6th, since we'll all be here. But I do want to thank the planning staff. I think both of those, the downtown overlay district and the parking changes, are really important first steps after the comprehensive land use plan that we passed. They seem like pretty substantial steps forward after that, very general plan was passed, but now we're able to see some specific changes to the UDO, which I think are positive. And I got, just to respond a little bit, again, generally to some of the comments that were made earlier, I mean, I want to ask people to try to really picture, where they like to spend time in Brevard, and how often do you love visiting Asheville Highway? And do you feel safe down there? Is it where you want to take people when you have guests from out of town? And then where do you spend the most time and the most money in Brevard? And then also an important thing to think about is, think about how much taxpayer money it takes to maintain different areas of the city. And for this, I'm talking about state money, city money. But Asheville Highway is an incredibly expensive bit of infrastructure to maintain. And, some of those changes to the downtown overlay district, in the long run, actually end up saving the city money, because it means that the infrastructure, the areas where we're concentrating financial impact and the buildings that we have are also connected by infrastructure that's cheaper to maintain. And so these are over very long periods of time, obviously, but there is a financial consideration as well. So again, thanks to the planning staff for bringing those forward. The next thing I want to talk about is, everybody's going to roll their eyes, but it's the Esteto Trail. And I know I talk about it a lot, but we're making a lot of great progress. I want to thank Public Works for all the work they're doing. I love waking up in the morning. It's like, 7 o'clock. I get some coffee, and then by 8 o'clock, I can start to hear the beeps of the tractors and the trucks behind my house, and it's a beautiful sound. I love it. Hopefully my neighbors agree, but we'll see. They're going to love the trail, I know that. So we've got Tannery South, which I call it, almost ready to be paved and completed. We've got Tannery North, the grant that recently came through that is going to help us build that. So really we have 2 remaining sections. We've got a short one that would connect Main Street to the Mary C. Jenkins Community Center, and then we've got a relatively long one across Rosamond Highway, which would go from Rosamond Highway to the high school. And I know we're still working on the sections we've got, but I want to just go ahead and push us to prepare the easements and get some design plans for those next 2 sections. I was a loud person in the audience complaining about lack of progress a few years ago. And I will admit that one of the things I have learned while sitting up here is the importance of having easements and design plans ready to go, because they do allow you to get grants. And so I want us to, even while we're building the current sections, preparing to go out and look for grants by getting the easements we need and the design plans. And, you know, another thing we need to look at that I brought up before is the section of the existing path that is already built, which is going to connect us to the Acosta Trail eventually. And I'll tell a very brief story. I was commuting to work at the brewery from my house, and I was going down right in front of Deer Lake Road, and there was an older couple that was pulled over to the side. So it's the section right where, in front of the gas station, where the bike path sort of doesn't exist. It's a sidewalk, but, and I could tell that they were on e-bikes, and, you know, they were maybe new to riding, and they were pulled over to the side, and they were looking at their phones, and they were confused because they thought the bike path was ahead of them, but it disappeared into a sidewalk. And they didn't have the experience to know that, well, just on the other side of that gas station, the bike path continues to the Acosta Trail. And I stopped and talked to them and got them, you know, going again. But, you know, that is a very real example of why, you know, some of the, even where the bike path, we consider it to be done, we have improvements to make so that the connection to the Acosta Trail is what I think we all believe it should be, to fully take advantage of that great thing. And, you know, that presentation we got last meeting about the Acosta Trail, was it last meeting or 2 meetings, whatever it was, 2 meetings ago. And I know the early timeline is the end of 2026, and that could change, but I think that would be a great goal to set for the completion of the Estato Trail as well, so that when both of those things are completed, we are ready to go. And I hope we can discuss that maybe at some upcoming budget meetings or committee meetings with the Parks, Trails, and Rec Committee. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Mr. Daniel?
Yeah, I'd like to address the downtown overlay as well. I think Mr. Harris had some good points about the street being the focus of the overlay rather than the block. If we're going to have a proximity to the street on one side, it seems a little odd that it wouldn't be on the other side. It seems incomplete. So I'd like that to be considered, how we could work that out. Because I think that would actually encourage development in that sort of, once you start having that sort of development in those areas, it makes it more attractive, I believe. Just my thoughts. The other thing I'd like to say is I'm really happy with the parking enforcement. As one of the folks in the room who's up for re-election, and parking is a discussion, it seems to me that parking enforcement will return quite a few of the parking spaces that we've lost due to our downtown improvements. So I look forward to that for many of those reasons, so thank you. And then Aaron reminded me of something that I've been thinking about somewhat lately, and that is at one time we were discussing with planning getting easements at the Inmark section of the Estato Trail to go behind those buildings. Is that still something that, is that kind of faded back a bit? I know we've got some of those easements, but that would just, I mean, as I've heard comments before, that's sort of the death alley section of our Estato Trail. And if we could get it off of the highway behind the buildings, it would be a safer place. It would feel safer. It would be safer. So, but I'm just bringing that back up from several years back, I think. That's all my comments.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Attorney?
No comments. Thank you.
Okay. Madam Clerk?
No comments, thank you.
Mr. Manager?
No, ma'am.
Okay, well, I just have a few comments. First, I do want to congratulate our planning department on, you know, I went with them last week to Durham to the North Carolina Planners Conference, and for a small town, it was obvious that we are doing so much. I went there and I listened to briefings by Durham, by Raleigh, by Charlotte, by Winston-Salem, by all of these big towns. And I thought I'd be sitting there getting ideas on things that I could take back and that we could do here. And instead I sat there through these briefings saying, we already did that. Oh, we've already done that. We already made that change to our UDO. And they're virtually, after 2 days of meetings, there was just one idea that they already had in the works that I could bring back to the manager. So, and that really is a great takeaway, that we are already doing as much as gigantic cities with 10 times the staff that we have. We are ahead of them in so many ways. And so I just have to compliment our staff. They did a great job. They gave a presentation at that conference. The room was full. I mean, it went extremely well. And their talk was on how to make big changes with a small staff. And we saw that continued today with additional modifications to our UDO that just make it easier for people to use. And that's a real tribute to the staff. So they also got an award. The planning department got an award. They got honorable mention for their multimodal transportation planning. So great job, staff, on that. And I have to congratulate Councilman Mac Morrow, who also went to Durham and got an award. And Councilman Morrow got an award for planning advocacy. And that is for the many, many years of advocacy that he has done for the Bracken Preserve. And I don't think we all realize just how long Mac has worked on that and how instrumental he has been in the initial creation of the preserve, as well as the expansion with the additional 34 acres. And so it was such a pleasure to see him getting recognized in this forum. So again, a congratulations to the entire team, our elected official, and our staff that was there in Durham. Let's see, we have a batch of things going on this week that I just want to make sure everyone is aware of. We do have a healthcare forum tomorrow. There's a healthcare town hall that the independent monitor, who is overlooking HCA's performance at Transylvania Regional Hospital and Mission Hospital, is holding a public meeting tomorrow at 5:30 at Thomas Hall up on Brevard Music Center. And so I encourage the public to take advantage of this, to hear from the independent monitor, and to share any thoughts you have on the healthcare situation. We also have the candidate forum Wednesday at 6 p.m. in the Rogo Room that the Chamber of Commerce is putting on. So again, a great way to hear where your candidates stand on different issues. And then on Thursday in the afternoon at 3 o'clock, the community is holding an interfaith prayer service for the people of Israel and Gaza. And so we will have a number of religious leaders and others talking. That would be at 3 p.m. Thursday, being held at the Lutheran Church. And I encourage, again, attendance for that so that we can pray for all of those that are not as lucky and fortunate to live in a safe country. We also have Friday. I mean, every night this week. I mean, we're out every night this week. Friday, of course, we're going to be doing Mom's Mabley, which can't wait for that. That's going to be an absolutely great effort there. Also, we had in the last few days, we had a wonderful ceremony with the Girl Scouts celebrating their 75 years in that little Girl Scout house. Now, that is a partnership between the city and the Girl Scouts. And the city, Public Works, does a lot of the maintenance out there. It's on city land. And a big thank you to Public Works. The Girl Scouts were absolutely thrilled. The place looks great for a 75-year-old building. And it really gives our youth a place to meet for something that teaches them the values that we all cherish. So that was a wonderful ceremony Saturday. And then last week, I want to just thank the Haven. We again partnered with them, and we held a World Homeless Awareness Day ceremony. And it's something that we just need to keep in our mind, that there are people who are less fortunate. There are people who do not have a home to go to, people who are not safe every night when they are out, camping. And it was good to remember that. It was good to come together in community and to talk about what we are doing and hopefully continue to work together. All of our partners that we are working on in terms of the housing situation were there. And we just, again, stressed how vital this is for our community to really wrestle with that. So, and last but not least, we of course have Meet the Mayor coming up October 26th from 2 to 4 p.m. here in City Hall. And I already discussed Veterans Day, which of course is on November 11th. And so a lot of things going on. We are such a dynamic community and so many partner organizations that make us so strong and so diversified. I think with that, it is time to move into our closed session. We still have one closed session, I
That's
believe.
correct. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Attorney, we have a closed session for personnel and employment. So I need a motion to move into closed session.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I ask that we clear the room and that we stop the broadcast.